I was thinking about what you made of today's hearing today, because I was incapable of finding any kind of precedent or any point of comparison even historically for what we saw. What was your reaction to it?
Well, my reaction to the hearing itself was that it was very early. They're just starting to unravel what is happening. We're just learning the basics. We're just getting affirmations about things that have been rumbled in the press. So it is not a pinnacle moment at all. It's just a really preliminary moment, if you will, is what I saw. And I was more stunned by the reaction of the White House and their handling of it, which seemed to me over the top.
Well, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because there are two issues here, and I think we're now headed towards a crash course. They're headed into each other. One is what may or may not have happened between the campaign and any Russian elements, right? Let's put aside that for a moment. There's also the question of whether this White House will obstruct, essentially, an investigation. You now have the head of the FBI with a target painted on his back, the frontline investigators with targets painted on their back. You have a U.S. attorney who the president had said he was going to retain, who has been summarily fired in Preparara. And it strikes me that in some ways there is a kind of obstruction landmine that the entirety of the White House now has to tiptoe through, and if they do not have a culture of compliance in that White House, they're going to blow themselves up.
That's absolutely correct. In fact, they are in a cover-up mode. There's just never been any question in my mind about that. I've been inside a cover-up. I know how they look and feel, and everything, every signal they're sending is we're covering this up. Experienced investigators know this. They know how people react when they're being pursued. And that's this White House is not showing they're innocent. They're showing how damn guilty they are, is what we're seeing. So this is par for the course, and they seem to have learned nothing from history because there have been too many cover-ups, and they're just typical is they're trying to distance themselves from people that are involved. Their characterization of what's going on.
I want to stop you there, because that to me was such a sort of striking moment. I mean, the Paul Manafort, General Flynn moment today in the press briefing, in which Sean Spicer basically tries to essentially say they barely had anything to do with the campaign. When we all watched it unfold and Manafort was a campaign manager, did that strike you as odd as well?
It absolutely did. Let me tell you how predictable this is and how cover-up-ish it is, because this is exactly what happened during Watergate. For example, when it came clear, when I had broken rank and became a public person out there, suddenly Nixon had never had any meetings with me at all. Then he'd had 1 or 2 meetings with me. Well, we had 37 meetings about Watergate. And he knew damn well that we had been deep in the thicket of it. But suddenly they distanced themselves. That's exactly what we're seeing here. When the break-in occurred, for example, of Watergate, and Hunt and Liddy were uncovered, and the fact they worked at the White House, suddenly they had done nothing at the White House. They'd had no real assignments. So this is classic cover-up, Chris, is what we're seeing.
Let me ask you, the idea that the President of the United States, one thing that stuck with me is that the day after the inauguration, he tracks down the acting director of the Park Services to essentially instruct him to find pictures of the inauguration that show bigger crowds. And if he does that for that, the question of does he call someone at the FBI? Does he call Comey? Does he call someone at a front line at a desk in FBI? I mean, all of those are the kinds of things you can imagine a president wanting to do and only being restrained from doing with, proper advice and counsel.
Well, he certainly has no problem calling out judges on his Twitter account, and that's getting closer to the area of obstruction. The obstruction statute is actually somewhat narrow. There is no grand jury at this point, so it's very hard to obstruct justice unless you actually have a court proceeding.
Interesting.
Because that's where justice is dispensed. There can be obstruction of Congress and other things like that by lying to them and so on, but the obstruction of justice statute hasn't come into play because it's too early in the investigation. But they're going into this with a very bad mentality that's going to get them in a lot of trouble.
It was the impaneling of a grand jury that ultimately was so crucial in Watergate. What kind of development did that represent then?
Well, because of the break-in and the arrests at the break-in, there was a natural and probable cause to create a grand jury to unravel what had happened at the arrest at the Watergate. But that grand jury then, after the successful trial of those involved who had been arrested, went on and started looking at the cover-up.
Right.
And that's where a lot of people got in a lot of trouble. They lied, they dissembled on things they didn't have to. Some people got before the grand jury who weren't even involved in Watergate and just lied about their activities at the White House and ended up with perjury charges. So these things can spread.
I don't dispense legal advice in the show, but if you're watching, you ever have an interview with anyone from the FBI, retain counsel and do not lie. John Dean, thanks for joining us.